Imagine this. You're an experienced hiker, deep in the Russian wilderness with your friends, tucked into your tent, ready for a freezing night. Then, something inexplicable happens. You and your entire group flee the tent in a panic, actually cutting your way out, abandoning shoes, warm clothes. Weeks later, your bodies are found miles apart, some with just bizarre injuries like crushed skulls and chests, others with eyes and even a tongue missing. And get this, some of your clothing is glowing with radiation, but no one, not even the authorities, can definitively explain what happened. Welcome to Cool, Weird, and Possible, the only place that dares to unpack the truth behind the Dyatlove Pass Incident. Today, we're taking you to the Northern Ural Mountains of 1959 to explore the bizarre fate of 9 skilled Soviet hikers. Their expedition ended in a mystery that, frankly, still confounds us. Our mission in this deep dive is to sort through the official reports, the haunting discoveries, and all the wild theories, from scientific explanations to those that veer into the truly unbelievable. Okay, let's unpack this. So our story centers around Igor Dyatlov and his group. 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. And when I say experienced, I mean really seasoned. These weren't amateurs out for a Sunday stroll. They were all grade 6 hikers aiming for the highest certification, grade the 3rd. For you, that means tackling at least 186 miles, a big chunk of it in brutally tough terrain. It requires like 8 nights minimum in uninhabited regions, 6 nights tent camping. And this particular route, super ambitious, a multi-day winter ski tour towards a Torton mountain. Remote, difficult, grade the 3rd stuff.
It is fascinating, though, how incredibly well prepared they were, despite everything that happened. This wasn't a group prone to making rookie mistakes. Not at all. Their journey started in Sverdlovsk. That's Yekaterinburg. Now, they took a train to Serov, then a bus to Vizhai, and finally a truck to Sector 41. And that was it. Their absolute last touch point with civilization. Their diaries really paint this poignant picture of camaraderie. You read about them entertaining school children in Serov, debating love, even singing German songs like Dong Dingle Dying from some movie. Sounds almost
idyllic, right?
A glimpse into their vibrant lives just before the inexplicable took hold. It's also really crucial to remember Yuri Yudin. He was a 10th member, a geology student. He turned back early because of chronic rheumatism, which was flaring up. A decision that, well, it saved his life, didn't it? He was curious to see an abandoned geologic settlement along the way, apparently. And the group's final diary entry, written by Igor Dyatlov himself on January 31st. It described difficult travel, strong winds, but also this unexpected, cozy feeling inside their tent.
This entry was written from a campsite near the Ospia Valley, really close to where they would eventually perish.
And perish they did. On the eastern slope of a mountain called Holacha, you might know it by its more chilling nickname, Dead Mountain. Although it's worth noting, the local Mansi experts, the indigenous people there, they say the name actually refers to its lack of vegetation, not, human fatalities. Either way, it was a high exposed camp, like 1,079 meters up, pretty exposed.
So the alarm was raised when Dyatlov's group didn't send a telegram by February 12th. That was their check-in date. Delays weren't totally unheard of back then for these kinds of trips, but relatives got increasingly concerned. They eventually demanded a rescue operation, and this kicked off a large-scale search. Volunteers, students, teachers, and then later, the Soviet military forces got involved too. Then on February 26th, 2 searchers, Mikhail Sherevin and Borislavtsov, they made the first really chilling discovery, the group's abandoned tent, and it was badly damaged on Kholat-Syakhl, Dead Mountain. What truly baffled them was the state it was in, half torn down, completely empty. All their belongings, their shoes, everything's still inside. But crucially, it had been cut open from the inside, multiple places, clearly indicating a desperate sudden escape, not like an external attack or even a planned exit.
Right, so they were so desperate, so panicked that they actively destroyed their only shelter, cutting their way out from the inside, and leaving everything they needed for survival in sub-zero conditions. To an experienced hiker, that sounds like the absolute ultimate last resort. What does that tell us about the threat they perceived? It's wow. Then, picture the scene. 9 sets of footprints. Some people wearing only socks, others maybe a single shoe, some even barefoot, leading downhill for like 1.5 kilometers towards a nearby wood before the snow covered them up. The search teams radioed back, completely bewildered. They said something like, "Why the whole group left tent half-dressed, we don't know yet. Absolutely no notion." Just confused.
Exactly. And as the search went on, they found the first 2 bodies, Krivodchenko and Doroshenko. They were under a large Siberian pine down at the forest edge, shoeless, dressed only in underwear. Nearby, there were remains of a small, kind of haphazard fire pit, charred cedar boughs nearby. And what was really striking were branches on the pine tree, broken way up high, like 5 meters, suggesting someone had climbed it, maybe looking for something, or trying to escape something. Then 3 more bodies were found between that pine tree and the tent. Dyatlov himself, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. Their poses. They suggested they were trying to get back to the tent, struggling against the elements, you know. Zina Kolmogorova was found with only socks on her feet. Rustem Slobodin had a ski cap on, but no shoes. Despite freezing temperatures, probably way below 0 Celsius.
Okay, here's where the story takes a truly, truly perplexing turn. The initial autopsy for Igor Dyatlov, the leader, attributed his death mostly to hypothermia, freezing. Signs like edema of the meninges that's swelling around the brain and hyperemia, increased blood flow in organs, classic signs of extreme cold. He also had some superficial scratches, abrasions. Okay, seems straightforward enough, maybe. But then, the real horror emerged when they found the remaining 4 bodies in May. Hidden under several meters of snow in a ravine, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles, and Alexander Zolotaryov. And their injuries. Wow. Thibeaux-Brignol had major skull damage, like catastrophic. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had severe chest trauma, broken ribs, internal hemorrhaging, injuries you'd expect from like a high-speed car crash, but they were just in a ravine. Rustem Slobodin, one of the first 3 found, actually had a small crack in his skull too, almost like a thin fracture. But the injuries to Lyudmila Dubinina and Alexander Zolotaryov, they were particularly disturbing. Gruesome, really. Lyudmila was missing her eyes, her tongue, and even her eyebrows. Alexander Zolotaryov also had missing eyes, plus that severe chest trauma. Kolovatov, he had minor injuries, but interestingly, his ankle had been bandaged before he perished. Suggests a previous injury, maybe? So the official conclusion for these 4 was violent trauma, yet crucially no external signs of a struggle or attack on their bodies in that ravine. These weren't simple falls, definitely not animal bites causing that kind of internal damage. The force implied was immense, but with no external signs, no attacker. It's an impossible riddle.
Yeah, the initial thought for those found with little clothing was paradoxical undressing. It's this strange, disturbing thing where extreme hypothermia messes with the brain's temperature control. Victims feel intensely hot, so they strip off clothes, even when freezing. But some sources counter that. They argue it doesn't quite explain everything. Some hikers were still clothed, or partially clothed, and there wasn't like a trail of discarded clothes leading downslope, so it might not be the sole explanation for everyone. It's complicated.
And then there's this other layer. Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest guy in the group. He was a World War II vet, had several tattoos, which apparently were unusual for the time in the Soviet Union. And his inclusion in the expedition, it was never really fully explained by the university that organized the trip. This led to these persistent suspicions, you know, that maybe he was KGB, maybe assigned to monitor the group because they were near some secret military test site. That detail definitely adds a whole other layer of like governmental intrigue to the mystery, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So when we try to unravel what happened, the most debated scientific theory is the slab avalanche hypothesis. The idea here is that new snow accumulated on the slope above their tent, weakening the snow base. This could have led to a slow-moving slab of snow pressing down on the tent, forcing them to cut their way out in a hurry. Proponents argue this could explain some of those severe but maybe not immediately lethal chest and skull injuries if they were lying down when the snow hit. The theory goes they fled downhill to find safety from this perceived avalanche, maybe misjudging the risk despite their experience. And actually, a 2021 model using historical weather reports did offer some support. It showed conditions could have allowed for such a slab avalanche.
But hang on a second. Doesn't that make their desperate flight even more baffling? These guys knew snow. They knew mountains. There are some really strong counter-arguments to the avalanche theory that just make you wonder. For starters, no obvious signs of an avalanche, right? No big debris field, no clear path like you'd expect. Plus, some bodies were in shallow snow, not buried deep like you'd think if they were swept away. And people argue that Dyatlov and Zolotaryov, being so experienced, were super unlikely to camp right in an avalanche path. They were experts at picking safe spots. Also, those footprint patterns, they apparently looked more like a normal walking pace, not a panicked run you'd expect fleeing an avalanche. And the tent itself. It was anchored properly for high winds and mostly intact except for those cuts from the inside. Experts also looked at the slope angle and thought it was unlikely for a significant avalanche there. It feels thin to some people.
Well, another natural explanation that's been proposed is the katabatic wind theory. This suggests sudden, extremely strong downhill winds could have hit the tent, maybe forcing them out, potentially causing injuries through falls or being thrown around. The issue there, though, is the logical thing to do in those winds is seek shelter immediately behind the tree line, which they only reached much later. And remember that flashlight left on top of the tent. Maybe as a marker, it suggests a desperate yet somewhat planned exit, not just being instantly blown away by wind.
Okay, so if avalanches and superwolves don't quite cut it, What about the really weird stuff? This is where conspiracy lovers perk up, right? Let's talk radiation. This is where it gets genuinely unsettling for a lot of people, finding high levels of radiation on some clothing, specifically a brown sweater, measured at 9,900 decays per minute. Now, to put that in perspective, that's way over the safety standards for people working with radioactive materials. It raised immediate alarms, even if the levels weren't, like, instantly lethal. Explanations. Maybe environmental fallout from nuclear tests, like those conducted on Novaya Zemlya, which is, okay, 850 miles north, but maybe. Or it suggested one hiker worked at the Mayak nuclear complex site of the world's third worst nuclear accident, and another lived in a contaminated zone. Maybe they brought it with them.
But the rebuttals are pretty quick to point out these were technically trace radiation levels, probably not dangerous enough to cause direct injury or death on their own. They could maybe be from something mundane, relatively speaking, like a thorium camp lantern, those used radioactive elements back then, or even just unwashed wool clothing picking up ambient background radiation. So it's a really key, strange detail, but what it means is still heavily debated. Significant clue to red herring.
Then there's the fire orbs, or military involvement theory. This is a classic for this case. Apparently, other hikers and independent witnesses in the region reported seeing these strange orange spheres in the sky around the time of the incident, specifically February 1st and February 17th. Naturally, this led to speculation about secret Soviet military rocket tests. Maybe from the Baikonur site, which is thousands of kilometers away, but, long-range missiles existed. And what's more, Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator on the case, years later hinted at fire orbs causing mind confusion and energy bundles unexplained by modern science. Yet, confusingly, he also officially stated the case was not related to the military. That contradiction just poured fuel on the suspicion fire, didn't it? Luda Dubinina's own father apparently believed a missile launch and explosion forced them out, affecting their condition, maybe their sight, leading to the tragedy.
And you really can't ignore the broader context here. This was the height of the Cold War, a time of intense secrecy, deep distrust of Soviet authorities. That climate inevitably colored the investigation and how people reacted to it. It fuels suspicions even today. Think about it. The initial prosecutor was quickly replaced. The funerals were mostly closed casket, just one exception. There seemed to be clear attempts to minimize the funeral turnout, like they wanted to just pretend nothing major happened. And for 3 years after the incident, the entire Northern Ural Mountains area was closed off to hikers, completely. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed, the classified documents that emerged didn't reveal anything drastically more sensitive than what the Dyatlove case already involved. Now, for some, that argues against some massive ongoing cover-up of, say, aliens or a superweapon. But for others, well, it just reinforces the idea of a very clever, deep concealment.
So we circle back. Even with all the evidence laid out, all the theories, scientific, military, even paranormal, a single universally accepted explanation just isn't there. It remains stubbornly elusive. What on earth compels 9 experienced hikers in the dead of winter to slash open their tent and flee into lethal cold, abandoning everything? Why those specific, brutal injuries, not matching animal attacks or simple falls, but suggesting immense unseen force? And yeah, what about the radiation? Where does that fit in?
It's incredibly complex. As Dr. Bedard, an expert on atmospheric infrasound, put it so well, what you're really trying to do is reverse engineer a tragic event without any witnesses. Without having been there, seeing it unfold. We just can't know with absolute certainty. The body showed various positions of surrender and intense struggle, according to reports. It's a prolonged fight for survival. Against what? An unseen force, natural or something else. The core mystery remains. What could possibly make such a highly trained group leave their only shelter to face certain death in that brutal cold?
The Dyatlove Pass Incident. It really remains the stark reminder, doesn't it? That even when you think you have all the facts laid bare, some mysteries just refuse to be fully solved. It's a truly cool, weird, and deeply possible scenario that just keeps us wondering, keeps us speculating. Maybe the truth isn't one single neat answer. Maybe it's a terrifying combination of factors. An environmental shock, maybe, compounded by the extreme conditions, the isolation, and just the human mind's desperate response when faced with the truly unknown. Maybe the real mystery isn't just what happened, but how these incredibly experienced individuals faced a challenge so profound, so terrifying, it completely defied all their training, all their survival instincts, forever leaving us to ponder the sheer terror of that night on Dead Mountain. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the world's most enduring and chilling puzzles. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to subscribe to Cool, Weird, and Possible so you don't miss our next adventure into the unexplained.